4 essential tips to climb the Marvel Snap ladder better, faster, and smarter. I hit Infinite every single month, but I'm joined by educated Collins who hit rank 600 Infinite, which is absolutely crazy. All right, so we got 4 essential tips here. The first one and the most important, I think, would be surprise cards.
Surprise cards are one of the key ways you can actually gain AQs from opponents. What usually happens in games is that people will be winning and then they'll leave, right? So you want to put people in positions where they think they're going to win. Then with these surprise cards, you turn the game around, you get them to stay, you subvert their expectations, and you get those 8 cubes. So things like Arrow, Shang-Chi, Juggernaut, any card that people don't always play around is really what is a powerful surprise card. Leader used to be very popular, but then with the nerf, right, it's not a game. And if people expect the card, it's not a surprise card, right? So it's really cards like Omega Red. People won't really expect that kind of card. And that's how you get them. That's how you get those 8 cubes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people focus too much on like win rate perhaps, but I think it's more about the cube win rate, and surprise cards I think are generally a really good way to kind of just get those extra cubes. For example, maybe you have a rogue in hand and your opponent's playing a dino deck, and then the last turn you throw the rogue down, you steal that ongoing, and they lose, and you get 8 cubes.
Yeah, it's so annoying. you've explained exactly what's happened to me before.
Yeah, so I think stuff like that, and then Juggernaut is really good, or maybe even having like a Scarlet Witch or a Rhino for a Limbo.
Don't get me started on Scarlet Witch. Scarlet Witch is my favorite card. It's so strong. It fits the cost. It's 2 mana, wins you the game. Sometimes it loses you the game.
Yeah,
2 mana wins you the game.
I feel like it always loses me the game, but
you just don't trust it.
Yeah, I think surprise cards are just super good. No one expects Juggernaut. I think Juggernaut is even a little bit slept on. Sometimes just throwing that into a deck. A lot of people net deck, but maybe like sneaking in a surprise card, such as Juggernaut, can really just get you the win. And your opponent will never expect it. So that's a really good way to up your cube rates. Something
that happens a lot is when opponents see a card, they immediately think of the full deck list, right? And they're like, okay, they have this. When you add in a card that's not in that deck list, oh, you can really sneak them, right? Because they're like, oh, I didn't think they had this card, but because it's my net deck, what you're thinking of, but you've added this unique option that people just won't expect.
Yeah, it's like, why were they running Enchantress? They shouldn't be running that in this deck, right? It's those surprises that really make you win or lose cubes. So.
It's a Patriot deck with Enchantress in it.
Yeah, what the heck?
What the hell?
So the second biggest tip we have here is picking a snapping style.
Yeah, so people generally, I would say, don't snap enough. And they also don't really snap in the right moments, right? You can pressure people to leave with good snapping. You can pressure people to stay in with also good snapping. And it's just understanding, okay, if I get this, I'm likely to win, I should snap. Another thing people don't do is they snap after they've won, right? They snap after like, oh, my Jubilee pulled Infinite, I'm gonna snap. You should snap before the Jubilee comes out, because you're playing the deck trusting in the Jubilee to work for you. You don't want to say, okay, everyone knows we've won, now I snap. So it's just understanding that you've got to snap before you know you've won, but the RNG is in your favor. So just picking a snapping style, figuring out this is the best time to snap, and then executing is definitely a way to get more cubes.
Yeah, I think just learning the ins and outs of your deck, maybe learning what combo is there, so you can snap accordingly. Like a lot of people, back in the day when Zabu was better, you would snap if you had Zabu, because that meant the next turn you'd be able to throw out 2 4-drops, and the following turn even more 4-drops. So that was a good way that I think people were snapping properly, because it was the most obvious. Another thing, maybe like Silver Surfer and having Brood. If you had both of those in your hand, you want to do that before you play the Brood, before you play the Silver Surfer, just so you can get those extra cubes from your opponent. So your opponent plays a Red Skull, you know they're going to Arnim Zola, and you have Shang-Chi in your hand, you also have priority. You want to snap before you play the Shang-Chi, just so they think they're going to win, but you end up stealing the win and the cubes from them.
Yeah, it's definitely a strategy I like to do. Shang-Chi is just so strong, honestly. This card's busted. Next tip, put Shang-Chi in your deck. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. What do you think about snapping on the last turn?
So I actually have a tip for last turn snapping. When it's last turn, I think you generally shouldn't snap on turn 6 unless you're going to lose. Now, the reason being is that if the snap is obvious, like if I snap, you win, people just leave, right? So if you don't snap when you think you're gonna win, you can actually play the game out, get the cubes. But if the match is close enough that you're not sure you're gonna win, then that snap could be the deciding factor, forcing them into a leave. So when it's close and you don't actually know you're gonna win, you think you're gonna lose, that's when you actually should snap and push them into the retreat.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like mind games and stuff too. Yeah. Like if you know your opponent has something large, maybe a devil dinosaur, and you top deck an enchantress, and you know, all right, I'm gonna be able to win with this. If you snap, you might end up getting just 1 cube instead of 2 because your opponent might just run. So I think generally it's better to secure the 2 cubes instead of snapping on turn 6 and having someone leave. But there's so many times like people jump by my stream and they're just like, oh, turn 6, oh, you're gonna win, snap. And I'm like, this is why you're ranked 20, you know, because you shouldn't snap on the last turn that often.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So another good tip we have here is actually learning to play your deck, because a lot of people, maybe they just net deck something, and there's no shame in net decking, but you really have to learn the ins and outs of it, understand what the deck is about, learn the combos, and kind of just stick to it. Don't play 3 games and move on, claim the deck is bad. What do you have to say about this, Collins?
Yeah, I think it's too common for people to just want to try the new thing, right? They get a new card or they see someone play a deck and they just like, okay, I want to try it. Let me go. They play it a couple of games. They don't like how it goes. They move on to the next thing, and over, so on and so on, all the time until, you know, eventually they get somewhere. But I think if you really want to get good at a deck or get good at the game, you want to understand the ins and outs of your deck. What locations is it good in? What matchups is it good in? What matchups is it bad? What are good draws? What are bad draws? When should you think about retreating with this deck? When should you think about pressuring? Can you snap turn 1 with this deck? Can you snap turn 3 with this deck? You know, that kind of thing. There's so many different intricacies and variables with a single deck that drastically changes from game to game that you won't understand in a single match. You won't understand in 10 matches. Sometimes it takes hundreds, maybe 1,000 games to really master a deck, and most people don't get to that level. So it's a shame that people are so willing to change strategies, change decks, and not really understand those core concepts you really need to squeeze every bit of advantage. And that's just
you actually hit like rank 400 with a Darkhawk Zabu deck, right?
600.
600?
Yeah.
Okay, so how many games do you think you played with that deck?
Like 5,000.
5,000 games? Oh my god. Yeah, see, so I played your deck and I played like 3 games and I like did terrible with them. But you know, the problem probably wasn't the deck. It was probably me and the fact that I didn't learn the play style of the deck. Because if I played 5,000, maybe I'd be rank it's 200 at least, right? So I think you're a good example of learning the ins and outs of your deck, knowing how to snap, when not to snap, which locations to retreat on, which locations to snap on even. It's really important. So being able to stick with one deck, put in the hours, get comfortable with it. I know back in Hearthstone, I felt like in order to really understand a deck, you had to play for like 8 hours at least to understand it at a decent level. Snap's a lot faster game, so maybe at least play it for a few hours. Don't just copy a streamer's deck, play it for 3 games, lose 24 cubes, and just claim that it's bad, right? All right, so the last tip we have is more about like pocket metas. You have to learn the metagame that you're in. If you're watching a player who's rank 600, they're going to be playing against very different things than you are, maybe in the beginning of pool 3, or maybe you're just getting your first series 4 or 5 cards. Your meta is going to be completely different. If you're rank 30, if you're rank 80, it's going to be different than what you're watching videos on. So you really have to learn your pocket meta,
especially when you're playing high level lobbies or whatever. You end up fighting the same people, and these people usually are running very similar compositions, right? So figuring out, okay, I'm fighting a ton of discard, I'm fighting a ton of Mr. Negative decks, and putting in like maybe a card to do well against those matchups, or adjusting your playstyle to do well in those matchups, right? Understanding, oh, they didn't hit Mr. Negative on fourth snap, you know, that kind of thing. There's ways to capitalize on the meta that you're in so that you retain an advantage even though you might have a disadvantage normally. You can change your card, you can adjust your strategy so that you just always are ahead of it. So the problem with this is that you have to be always paying attention to how the meta changes day by day. You can't just pick a strategy and then ignore it. Don't change things for months. You have to adjust. You have to react to what you're fighting, what you're seeing, how the meta is evolving. And that's really how you always get that advantage, always have an edge against your competition.
I think this really also loops back to the surprise cards element. If you're playing against the same sort of decks, maybe just change one of your cards, put in a different tech card, maybe drop a card that's underperforming against what you're seeing in your pocket meta. I always loop back to the Shang-Chi example because it's the easiest one to make. But if you're seeing a bunch of red skulls, a bunch of devil dinosaurs, and you don't have Shang-Chi in your deck, maybe want to put him in there for the time being. Or maybe you just really want a rogue because you're seeing a lot of Iron Mans or something like that. So kind of read what you're running into and just adjust according. A lot of this also ties in with like learning your deck as well, because you need to learn which cards are bad right now. Like maybe this card's underperforming. It was a tech card for this. Like maybe you are running Enchantress in your deck because you saw someone on YouTube running Enchantress, but you're not running into anything that Enchantress helps you against.
A lot of people were like complaining that, oh, I'm always losing the arrow or so recently, right? And I was like, okay, add a magic into into your composition, because if you add magic, their arrow strategy doesn't really work as easily, right? You have more cards on the board, and they have their big play on turn 6 doesn't really feel as impactful on turn 7 anymore. So those are kind of the adjustments you have to make day by day to kind of really keep an edge over the competition.
Yeah, I love that example because I started running Magic a lot, and she just feels so good because people are floating turn 5 so they can have a huge turn 6, and then you just negate their whole game plan, and then they end up not knowing what to do because they probably don't encounter that too much. But yeah, some really good tips. I think these should help you push your rank up. Just, be sure to learn the ins and outs of your deck. Snap when you should, not after you've done a big play, preferably before a big play. Include some of those surprise cards, and then just learn your pocket meta.